of religion in our ever-changing world. From the News Channel 5 Network, this is Issues of Faith.
And welcome to Issues of Faith. I'm Jennifer Kraus, filling in for Ben Hall this week. And I am thrilled to have the guest joining me. Bishop Melvin Talbert joins us, retired bishop with the Methodist Church, who made news and even came under fire from your own church because you made the decision to perform a same-sex wedding recently. Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, and I'm delighted to be here with you.
And I'm looking forward to this conversation. You're retired.
Yes.
And living here in Nashville.
Yes.
And you recently were contacted by two men living in Alabama who had a legal marriage ceremony in Washington, D.C., but they wanted a religious ceremony. So they contacted you. And tell me, how did that call go when you got it?
Well, it was a kind of circuitous way. I'll need to go back a little bit and tell you, at the last General Conference, 2012, I made a statement to my sisters and brothers who are gay and lesbian after the General Conference refused to remove the derogatory language and the prohibitive laws. And I simply declared to them that, God has already settled this matter. And those derogatory statements and those laws are immoral and unjust and no longer deserve our loyalty and support. And then I called for biblical obedience using Micah 6 and Matthew 12:28 through 31. Micah 6 is that famous passage, "What does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love mercy and walk humbly with God?" And the Mark passage, did I say Matthew? It's Mark 12. That has to do with Jesus saying to the scribe who asked him, which is the greatest commandment? And he said, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and your neighbor as yourself."
So you call on the church to change its course, essentially, and they didn't do
and
it.
be biblically obedient to the call of the prophets of old and to Jesus, whose highest law is love. And they refused to do that. And I decided, as a bishop of the church, one at this level of the church needed to say a word to our sisters and brothers who for 40 years been struggling with this statement in our book of discipline.
What prompted you? What hit your heart and made you want to take this bold step forward?
At the site of the General Conference, first of all, I'm on the board of Reconciling Ministers Network. That's a group of people, a caucus, who's working for inclusion of GLBTQI people in the church. In fact, I'm vice chair of the board. So at the General Conference, I was asked to make a statement, no matter which way it would go, if I chose to do it. Well, as the General Conference was struggling with this issue, I began to struggle in my soul. And one morning, as I got up, getting dressed to go to the conference for that day, it hit me. Mel Talbot, what are you going to do? And I thought about it, and I said, this General Conference is not going to pass this issue. You keep your ear to the ground, and you'll be listening. And I said, somebody's got to speak out. So I consulted with some of my colleagues and tried to get some of them to go along with me, and they said, well, I'm not quite ready yet. And finally I said, I guess it's going to be. And going to be me. And the Spirit says, why not?
So you knew going into this that you were going to be going against the church and most of the people that you were serving with.
Oh yes. I knew that my thinking was moving in that direction. And then I chose to do it. And I told the people at the conclusion of my statement that if the opportunity presented itself, I would do a same-gender wedding. And then the opportunity presented itself. And it happened in there was a person from Alabama at General Conference. The couple went to his pastor to ask her to do it. And she said no, she couldn't. She knew that was a violation of the law. But then she recommended the couple to the former pastor. It was a former pastor who was at General Conference, and he told them, I'll be happy to do it, but I think I know someone else who would be glad to do it, and I wouldn't have to get in trouble for doing it.
Now, when you agreed to do that, I'm assuming then you knew you potentially could get in a lot of trouble from the church for taking not only the stance, but then actually taking the next step forward.
Oh yes, I knew that. I knew that it was a violation of church law. I am a student of the discipline, and I knew that. But I felt the time had come for someone at my level of the church to say to the people involved and to the total church, bishops don't agree on this issue. And that's the way it is in my council, but I am the one at this point who is publicly speaking out.
Now, I believe we have some photos from the wedding that we can share, and as we're taking a look at some of those photos, tell us about the service.
Okay, all right.
I'm sure when you were serving as bishop and minister, you performed many wedding ceremonies. Did this differ than?
It was just a regular wedding. You know, we went into that day anticipating, obviously, some disturbance. We had some law enforcement people on call if needed, but the day was beautiful, no disruption at all, and it went off wonderful. The ceremony was well planned, it went off great, the people were so happy, and one of the men had been married before and he had children and grandchildren. They were all there celebrating this new day, and the congregation, which was basically the congregation, the church was practically filled. It was a joyous occasion, and I was just delighted. I have no regret for doing it. I just think it was the right thing to do. And I did not just do it out of spite. I did it because I was led that way by the faith that I have in the church and what the church is called to do. And some people accuse me of just looking for media, all of that stuff, but that's not it. It goes back for many years. I was in the Syrian movement as a student in Atlanta back in the 60s. I committed myself to nonviolence. I stayed in jail with Martin Luther King for 3 days and 3 nights. And in that experience, my life was totally changed. I was operating out of hate for white folk, and Martin Luther King came along with this alternative of love as the best way, and I bought into that, and that has guided my life ever since.
So can you compare the two fights for rights?
Yes, I can. They are one and the same. Discrimination is discrimination, no matter what it is. Human beings are created in the image of God, all of them. I don't care who they are. And we, as people of faith, have the privilege of doing what? Opening our hands and inviting all of God's people to come to worship and to praise in fellowship. We don't have the right to become God, to stand and look at this crowd and to say, you can come, but you can't come. You know, when you point a finger at one person, what's happening to the rest of the fingers?
So how do you
pointing right back at you.
How do you reconcile this, though, that your own church is taking a totally opposite position?
Well, I think the time has come for we as bishops to not only speak for the church, but to speak to our church. I have not taken a poll of my colleagues in the council, but I would say at least 45% of them would say deep in their hearts, this is wrong. This is wrong. And if it is, it's time for us to say that and stop hiding behind the law. The law is not the only thing that I'm committed to. When I was called to the ordained ministry, it's true that my church facilitated the process and gave me the wonderful privilege of serving. And I've had more privileges than the average person being a leader in the church. But my God called me to be faithful to God and not to the laws of the church. And I am convinced that the law of God is saying to me and to the church, do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with God, and to admit that this law is wrong. You see, it's not the first time that our church has been on the wrong side. We were on the wrong side over the slavery issue. We were on the wrong side with the issue of women, the role of women in the church. This is another one of those cases. And it's time for us to step up to the plate and say, no more discrimination. These are all God's children.
But just as you use Scripture to explain your position, there are those, not only in your church, but of other faiths or other churches, who also cite Scripture, who will say this is to say this is wrong.
Yes, I'm well aware of that, and I know all of those scriptures. But when you read the Bible, it is not consistent. When you also read the Bible, you have to understand how the Bible came to be. The Bible didn't come by God calling all of the computer whizzes to a mountain and say, on this day, I'm going to give you the Bible, and start at Genesis and go to Revelation. The Bible came through human beings just like you and me, who were faithful in their witness. They did all they could, all their level best to understand who God is and what God is calling them to do. But you and I know we are human, and we have frailties. And if you look at what we do today, you will know, in spite of how faithful we say we are, we don't always do right. Well, my sisters and brothers of years ago, when the scriptures were coming into being, they did their best, but they weren't God.
On that note, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to continue our conversation with Reverend Talbert in just a moment. Don't go away.